Welcome, everyone. Ready to take a deep dive into how truly massive fortunes are built? We've got some fascinating sources for this one, including Wealth Secrets of the 1% by Sam Wilkin. It's a journey through history, economics, even a bit of psychology.
Absolutely. We're going to look at tactics from ancient Rome all the way to modern day oligarchs and everything in between.
One of Wilkin's main points is that it's not always about brilliant ideas or just working hard, though those help. There are these kind of hidden wealth secrets, ways to get ahead that most folks don't even realize exist.
A lot of it comes down to think of it like building a moat around your business. The less competition you have, the more you profit.
Okay, I like that analogy. So are we starting chronologically then? Take us back in time. Where do these secrets first pop up?
Well, we could go way back to ancient Rome, the story of Marcus Crassus. He was one of the wealthiest men in Roman history, and Wilkin uses him as a prime example of how when things are chaotic, politically, economically, that's when huge opportunities open up for the right person.
Right, chaos equals opportunity, if you know how to play it. I'm already intrigued. Tell me more about Crassus.
So picture this. Rome's going through these violent purges called proscriptions. Basically, if you're on the wrong side of power, your assets are seized, often you're killed too. It's brutal.
Not a great time to be alive
Unless you're Crassus. He's smart, connected. He sees that all these assets are suddenly up for grabs, going for pennies on the dollar because everyone's terrified.
So he's profiting off of other people's misfortune. Cold, but effective, I guess.
Extremely effective. While Rome's tearing itself apart, he's building a fortune, using the system itself against itself.
That's a pattern we're going to see again and again, isn't it? Finding the opportunity where others just see danger. Let's jump ahead now to the 19th century in America. We've got the robber barons, guys like Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, Carnegie.
Oh, these figures are fascinating. Each one dominated an industry: railroads, oil, steel, and Wilkin. Dives into how they used economies of scale to really change the game.
Economies of scale, break that down for our listeners.
Simply put, in certain industries, the bigger you are, the cheaper it costs to make each individual thing. So you can undercut everyone else's prices and still win.
I'm thinking of Vanderbilt and his shipping empire specifically. He offered super low fares, almost too good to be true.
Right, and his early focus was on steamboats. He realized every extra passenger barely cost him anything once the boat was running. It was all about filling those seats.
And that let him drive competitors out of business, then jack up prices once he was in control. Ruthless.
Oh, Vanderbilt was known for being ruthless on and off the business field. Do you know he was famous for these crazy horse-drawn carriage races through New York City? Total daredevil.
Wow, makes sense, that kind of personality. Okay, well, what about someone like Rockefeller? Oil's a whole different beast, right?
Rockefeller, he's the master of partnerships, or maybe manipulation is a better word. He figured out that controlling how the oil moved feed was as important as controlling the oil itself.
And that's where the Self-Improvement Company comes in, right? That whole scheme.
Ugh, the Self-Improvement Company. Essentially, it was a cartel. Rockefeller got together with the big railroad companies. They all agreed to jack up shipping prices.
Except for Rockefeller's own oil, of course.
Exactly. He got secret rebates, so his oil was cheaper to transport while everyone else was getting crushed. He took over the industry by controlling the pipelines, not just the wells.
Brilliant, in a way. But it's also, raises questions about ethics, how much power one person should have.
No doubt. That's the thing about these wealth secrets. There's often a dark side to them, even if they're ingenious.
So true. All right, let's make one more big leap into the digital age. Bill Gates. Genius coder, sure. But Wilkin says there's something else at play, too. Network effects.
Network effects. This is key for understanding the tech world. Basically, the more people use something, the more valuable it becomes to everyone using it.
Like Facebook has more value if all your friends are on it, that kind of thing.
Precisely. And Gates understood this early on. Think about Microsoft's operating system, DOS, then Windows. The more people used it, the more software developers made programs for it, which made more people want to use it. It snowballs.
He controlled the foundation, so he controlled what was built on top of it. Very smart, though it did lead to, antitrust lawsuits and all that.
Right, because when you have that much power, people get worried. It's a question of whether progress is being stifled, even if the initial product was innovative.
Lots to think about there. Okay, switching gears completely. Let's go to India. Dhirubhai Ambani. Now, this is interesting because Wilkin argues that Ambani he thrived in a really difficult business environment, which seems counterintuitive.
It's a great example of how the worst places to do business can actually be the most profitable if you know how to work the system. India at that time had this thing called the license Raj, basically a ton of red tape, bureaucracy, permits for everything.
Most people would see that as a nightmare, right? Too much hassle.
But Ambani, he didn't just tolerate it, he mastered it. He understood the regulations better than anyone, knew how to get the licenses no one else could, built his whole empire, Reliance Industries that way. He turned what was supposed to be a level playing field, this system of rules, into his own personal wealth-making machine. And the lesson there, in those restrictive economies, the biggest secret, is knowing how to get preferential treatment, how to work those loopholes to your advantage.
It makes you wonder, though, what's the government's role in all this? Should it be making things more fair, or is that just part of the game?
And that brings us to another fascinating point that Wilkin brings up: government guarantees. Particularly in the financial sector, he goes into detail about the savings and loan crisis in the 80s in the US, and even the too big to fail problem during the 2008 crisis.
Okay, I vaguely remember those, but how do those tie into wealth secrets?
Because when the government promises to bail someone out, well, it encourages risky behavior. It's like a safety net that lets people take bigger gambles than they should.
I see. So it's almost like moral hazard on a massive scale. People aren't as careful with their money or other people's money if they think someone else will pick up the tab.
Precisely. Wilkin has a great term for this, for how a lot of these wealth-building schemes work: dictatorship by tedium. Basically, the rules are so complex, so boring, that the average person has no clue what's really going on.
Hiding in plain sight, right?
Yeah.
We get bogged down in the paperwork, the jargon, and meanwhile,
Meanwhile, the people who do understand those rules, they can exploit them. It creates this whole environment where most folks just tune out, give up trying to understand.
and that's how the wealth secrets stay secret. Not because they're hidden, but because they're buried under mountains of legal complexity. Kind of depressing, if you think about it.
It is, in a way. Okay, let's bring it to the present day now. Modern oligarchs. Wilkin argues that they're using a lot of the same tactics, especially in emerging markets.
So like Dhirubhai Ambani, they're thriving in places where there's a lot of corruption, weak rule of law.
Exactly. Those places are tough for most businesses, but for the ones who know how to play the game, they're gold mines. Leveraging connections, finding those loopholes, becoming the dominant force in a key industry. It's all there.
A consistent pattern throughout history, right?
Yeah.
It makes you question the whole idea of a level playing field in business.
No doubt about it. One thing that really struck me throughout all these examples is how much of it is about controlling competition, not just offering a better product or service.
It's like playing Monopoly, but you get to change the rules as you go, make sure you win, no matter what.
Great analogy. And that brings up a huge question. If so much wealth is built on limiting what other people can do, is that good for society as a whole? What about fairness? What about people who are trying to climb the ladder?
Right, we're talking about wealth and equality here, a topic that everyone's concerned about these days.
Yeah.
It feels like the gap between the super rich and everyone else is just getting wider and wider.
And Wilkin digs into that too, the potential consequences. It can lead to social unrest, political instability. It's not a sustainable situation in the long run.
So knowing these wealth secrets isn't just about, getting rich ourselves. It's about understanding the system we live in, being informed citizens, making better choices as voters, investors, everything.
100%. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to stuff like this that's often intentionally hidden from view.
We talked about this dictatorship by tedium idea earlier.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how effective that is at masking these wealth secrets. It's like trying to understand a giant, constantly changing jigsaw puzzle with no picture to guide you.
And the pieces keep changing shape. The image is always fuzzy. It's designed to be overwhelming, make people give up.
Exactly. So how do we fight that? Where do we even start if the whole system is designed to make us feel powerless?
Wilkin offers some historical comparisons that might give us some clues. He talks about how the tactics used by the Roman elite during those prescriptions, it's not that different from how some modern-day billionaires made their fortunes.
Wait, are you saying there's a connection between, like, Marcus Crassus and, I don't know, some Russian oligarch today?
The specifics might be different, but the core idea is the same. Taking advantage of instability, making sure there's little to no competition. It works across centuries, apparently.
Give me an example of that. How does that play out in the modern world?
Look at Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. Total chaos, right? But a small group of people, often with ties to the old regime, they got insanely rich, really fast.
The oligarchs, yeah, their stories are crazy. Private jets, yachts, political influence.
And they got that way by grabbing up former state-owned assets for cheap, often through shady deals. The laws were weak, enforcement was even weaker. It was the perfect environment to exploit.
Sounds like the Wild West, but with more caviar. Makes you wonder if the same thing's happening in other places that are growing quickly economically.
It's a good question. Anytime you have rapid growth combined with weak institutions, it's a recipe for potential abuse. Are those super rich entrepreneurs just being savvy, or is there something more going on?
This is making me rethink the whole rags to riches myth. It's rarely that simple, is it? There's always a system, a context, and these secrets are about understanding that system better than everyone else.
Exactly. We can admire the ambition, the drive, but we also have to be aware of the methods. What are the costs, not just for those individuals, but for society as a whole?
We were talking about Bill Gates earlier and how he used network effects to build Microsoft. But that also led to those antitrust lawsuits, the government stepping in to say, hey, this is getting too powerful.
And that's the tension, right? We want innovation, but we also don't want one company, one person to have total control. It's a tricky balance.
Like that tragedy of the commons thing, but for the economy. Too much self-interest can ruin it for everyone in the long run.
Exactly. So the question becomes, how do we design a system that encourages innovation, but also keeps things fair? It's not about punishing success. It's about making sure everyone has a shot.
So we're not just talking about business anymore. We're talking about ethics, about what kind of society we want to live in.
Exactly. And Wilkin dives into this too, the ethical side of these wealth secrets. Does accumulating huge wealth always require being ruthless, being unfair?
I guess some people would say that's just how capitalism works, right? Survival of the fittest, and the fittest are the ones who end up with the most money and power.
That's one perspective. But there are plenty of examples of successful people who also care about doing good, about making the world a better place. It's not an either-or situation.
Not all robber barons, I guess. I'm thinking of Andrew Carnegie, built a steel empire, but then gave away most of his fortune to libraries, schools.
Right, Carnegie's a fascinating case. He was ruthless in business, but also believed in giving back. It makes you wonder, at what point does being wealthy come with a responsibility to help others?
Especially with the levels of wealth inequality we're seeing today. Wilkin doesn't shy away from that. He talks about how dangerous that can be for everyone.
It leads to instability, resentment, and honestly, it can be a drag on the whole economy if wealth is too concentrated at the top.
So we need to be having these conversations, thinking critically about how wealth is created, not just celebrating the billionaires without understanding the full picture.
I couldn't agree more. And that's what I appreciate about Wilkin's book. It's not just a how-to guide on getting rich. It's a deep dive into the systems themselves, the ethics involved.
It's eye-opening for sure. This whole deep dive has been, honestly, it's not just about finance. It's about history, psychology, even philosophy in a way.
It all ties together, and it forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about how the world works.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. From ancient Rome to today's tech giants, we've seen these similar patterns, these wealth secrets that have helped people build huge EE fortunes.
And it's not just the HOW, it's the WHY, right?
Yeah.
What drives these individuals? What are the societal impacts? We've gone beyond just economics here.
We started with Crassus, then the robber barons in America. Now we're talking about Bill Gates, Dhirubhai Ambani. Such different times and places, yet those same threads keep appearing.
Exploiting chaos, bending the rules, creating monopolies. And the question becomes, is this just how the world works? Or can we do better?
Because understanding these secrets isn't just about, oh, I want to be a billionaire too. It's about being informed, knowing how power operates, so we can maybe make some changes.
Right. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to systems that most people don't even realize exist. We can't just be passive observers. We have to understand the game if we want to change the rules.
And Wilkin ends his book on a really thought-provoking note. He says that this relentless pursuit of wealth, especially when it's about shutting out everyone else, it could actually harm innovation in the long run.
That's a fascinating point. So much of progress is driven by competition, by new ideas challenging the old ones. But what happens if that competition is stifled?
It's like, imagine only a handful of companies or people control everything, the resources, the technology, even the information. Where's the room for something new to emerge?
It creates this stagnation, this sense that the future is already predetermined. And that's not how progress happens. It's messy, it's unpredictable, that's where the breakthroughs come from.
Almost like that rent-seeking behavior you see in some industries. people profiting off the existing system instead of building something truly new W. Not very inspiring.
Exactly. So the challenge for us as a society is how do we incentivize that kind of creative destruction, that positive change, without letting things get too out of hand?
Right, because we want successful businesses. We want people to have the opportunity to create wealth, but not at the expense of everyone else. Finding that balance is tough.
It is, but these are the conversations we need to be having because it's not just about economics, it's about values, about what kind of future we're building.
Well said.
Hmm.
This whole deep dive has been incredible, honestly. So many things to think about.
I agree. We've covered so much ground, but it feels like we're just scratching the surface. There's always more to learn, more to unpack when it comes to wealth and power.
We explored those historical parallels, broke down some pretty complex strategies, and maybe even challenged some of our own assumptions about success and what it really means.
Right. And ultimately, it's about understanding that the pursuit of wealth, it's never happening in a vacuum. It's shaped by history, by politics, by ethics. It's all connected.
So as our listeners keep learning about this, maybe a question to ponder is this. If these wealth secrets really do threaten innovation, how do we create a system that's both prosperous and fair?
That's the million-dollar question, maybe even the trillion-dollar question. And there's no easy answer, but it starts with awareness, with asking the tough questions, with being willing to challenge the status quo.
Well said. This has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of wealth creation. We hope it sparks some new ideas, some critical thinking.
Because as we've learned, understanding how wealth is built is crucial for everyone, not just those aspiring to be billionaires. It affects us all.
Before we wrap up, let's take a moment to recap those 10 key takeaways.
Absolutely, just to keep those ideas fresh in everyone's mind.
Number 1, building barriers to entry. The super rich, they love to limit competition however they can. That's how they maximize profits.
Number 2, exploiting instability. Times of chaos, that's when the biggest opportunities emerge, but you gotta be ready to seize them. Not always ethically either.
Number 3, economies of scale. Getting big, making each unit cheaper. That's how you dominate industries.
Number 4, strategic alliances. Sometimes it's about who you know, who you team up with, but those partnerships often come at someone else's expense.
Number 5, network effects. The more people use something, the more valuable it becomes. Think Facebook, Google, Microsoft. That kind of exponential growth is powerful.
Number 6, regulatory mastery. Understanding the rules, bending the rules, even breaking the rules. It's all part of the game, especially in places with lots of red tape.
Number 7, government guarantees. When the government promises to bail someone out, it can encourage risky behavior, and those bailouts often come from taxpayers' pockets.
Number 8, dictatorship by tedium. The rules are so complex, it's like they want us to give up trying to understand. That's how the real secrets stay hidden.
Number 9, wealth inequality. When too much wealth is concentrated at the top, it's bad for everyone in the long run. Leads to instability, resentment. It's a recipe for trouble.
And lastly, number 10, ethical considerations. Building wealth, it's not just about the money, it's about how you get there. There's always a choice, and those choices have consequences.
So much to ponder. Thanks again for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic to explore.
Until then, keep those wealth secrets in mind. They're all around us, shaping the world we live in.